and good morning to everyone. June 1st is usually a moment in the year where many of us take a deep breath. I know that we graduated nearly 4,000 students on the academic side, 9 days ago. Folks in the finance side are closing up the books on the fiscal year that wrapped up late last night, and those in advancement are at least beginning to take a deep breath after the $1.5+ billion campaign ended late last night. So there would be many reasons for us all to just go to our own corners of the university and shut out the larger world this morning. It's wonderful on this day to see so many people engaged in the common work and thinking forward for the summer, for next year, and for many years to come about how we can make this an even more welcoming community. So it's great to have you here and to start thinking forward about how we can work together on this critical front. It's great to be part of this inaugural Diversity Summit. We all need to thank Patricia Lowe and her team in the Office of Institutional Diversity for all their hard work that was just detailed over this past year and many years before that. It's encouraging, again, to see so many colleagues from so many corners of the university engaging in such thoughtful ways. In academic affairs, we've devoted a good deal of time this past semester, and really the full past academic year, to serious and sustained discussion of diversity and inclusion. I've been pleased with the initial reports from each of the school's educational policy committees that are coming forward, as well as the assessments that are now helping to inform the University Strategic Planning Initiative. Creating a welcoming Boston College is a critical priority for all of us, and today gives us an opportunity, both individually and collectively, to reflect on our commitment to diversity and to think about how we can strengthen our efforts. And I think that great Ignatian insight of reflection, taking this moment after the busyness of the year, academic, fiscal, fundraising, all of those, really we're called to take a step back and to think both about what we can do in our individual and local ways, and then more broadly, collectively and institutionally. I should note this morning that the bc.edu website now features a new page, part of the Campus Life heading on the front page, showcasing institutional initiatives related to diversity and inclusion. It's taken many months to get it in shape, but it's going live this week and reflects the efforts of so many gathered here today, kind of building on that green sheet that was just pointed to. I look forward to seeing that site develop further this summer and beyond, and to additional signs of progress well on into the new academic year. As a Jesuit and Catholic university, we're called to educate and to serve all of God's people. A steadfast commitment to diversity is built into our foundational DNA. I look forward to today's various sessions and to the ongoing work of becoming more fully the kind of welcoming university we're called to be. It's now my great pleasure to welcome this morning's keynote speaker. Damon A. Williams is a scholar, leader, and educator, passionate about making organizations both inclusive and excellent for all. His career has focused on creating equitable educational outcomes and developing leadership in young people across the nation. He has served since 2013 as Senior Vice President for Program Training and Youth Development Services for the Boys and Girls Clubs of America. In this role, he's the Chief Education Officer for the Boys and Girls Clubs movement, serving a critical role as both strategist and as kind of leader in strengthening the club's experiences for the nearly 4 million young people served annually across the nation by the clubs. Prior to joining BGCA, Damon A. Williams served for 5 years as Associate Vice Chancellor, Vice Provost, Chief Diversity Officer, and faculty member in Educational Leadership and Policy Analysis at the University of Wisconsin. During his time at Madison, he founded and led the Division of Diversity, Equity, and Educational Achievement, launching new initiatives on campus and developing innovative partnerships across and beyond the university. A graduate of the University of Michigan, where he received his PhD in Organizational Behavior and Management, Williams has been a 4-time scholar in resident for the Association of American Colleges and Universities, where he has long participated in their Inclusive Excellence Project. Please join me in giving a warm Boston College welcome to Damon A. Williams.
Boston College, it's so good to be with you today. Thank you so much for that wonderful welcome, and thank you all for the gift of your time today. For those of you who are active in social media, I am at DAWPhD, and we are hashtagging today strategic diversity leadership and also hashtagging inclusive excellence, if anybody would like to use those handles as we move forward into our talk. I always love the opportunity to return to New England. Even though I'm not a New Englander, I feel as if I have deep root here because I spent 6 years at the University of Connecticut just down the road and had the wonderful opportunity to work under the tutelage of one of your incredibly illustrious alum, Professor Emeritus, Vice Provost Emeritus Ronald Taylor, a legendary sociologist who just made iconic contributions to the discussion of race, community, and family, and males and gender in this country. And so I am not a direct product of Boston College, but I am one of his intellectual children running about the world. And so since he claimed his root here, I also take just a small little, tiny, small little piece of my foundation from this experience at Boston College, because he is one of the finest men, one of the finest scholars, one of the finest leaders, and the finest human beings I have ever encountered in my life. And so kudos to all of you in being wise enough to bring him into your school and educate him and put him into the world. So thank you for that. I've had the good fortune to work with hundreds of institutions around the country and to some degree around the world, some of them informed by the Catholic tradition, some of them informed by the Jesuit tradition. And I always find it refreshing to be in an environment in which we can begin with invocation and prayer. And I always found it refreshing and inspiring to be in environments where we can actually talk openly about a mission that is informed by the idea of social justice, a mission that is informed by the idea of inclusion, a mission that is informed by the idea of trying to educate all of our students, to prepare all of our community to be leaders of change in the world today. As I've had the chance to visit so many different institutions, I'm oftentimes confronted with this. Our institution is struggling with respect to campus diversity and needs to find a way to turn the corner. How can we do it? Where do we start? How can we truly make a difference? We have a diversity plan, but is it enough? Can you tell us what to do? Can you help? We need the force. Save me, Obi-Wan Williams. You are our only hope. And so I'm oftentimes confronted with this, and it's happening more and more now. I actually retired these slides a couple years ago, but so many people were throwing up the bat signal, I thought I had to bring them back. With all that's going on across our nation, each and every day, so many campuses feeling the pain of unrest, hearing the voice of their students, trying to find new ways to grapple with these questions of diversity, equity, and inclusion, trying to find new ways to grapple with what does it truly mean to move forward in a 21st century moment around this broad question that continues to evolve that we call diversity. Now, the first thing I always like to begin with is that there are no magic bullets. I have no magic solutions here with me. And I believe very fundamentally that the work is hard and it takes time and it takes a deep commitment. But at the same time, I do consider myself to be a child of the force. And I oftentimes do act in that way. And so in preparing for today, I actually consulted the wisdom of Yoda. And I wanted to share that with you. Strongest is the culture with this one. Colleges and universities are most resistant to change. Nebulous and multiple goals they have. Decentralized environments are prevalent. Shared governance confounds the greatest of leaders. Faculty and staff, they live long in the life of the campus. Conflicting ideas regarding diversity and excellence persist. Loosely coupled systems make the future difficult to see. Ritualistic and symbolic, their planning efforts, not focused on real change, deep transformation. Difficult will be the process of transforming culture. Difficult will be the process of implementing campus-wide diversity plans. Difficult will be the process of achieving inclusive excellence. Strong you must be in your resolve. Proceed forward with caution. So I begin with those tongue-in-cheek comments from someone who has inspired me greatly through their words of wisdom, Yoda. But those of you who have spent any time on a college campus know that the words that I shared ring out. That the citizens of our institutions live long in the life of our environments. That we're in environments that have incredibly strong cultures, as we have symbolized here in this room today. and that in many ways, the institutions that we find ourselves were not built to be diverse. And that's no critique of those institutions. They were simply not built to be diverse. Over time, they've evolved to become diverse. But yet, as they've evolved to become diverse in demography, how and in what ways have they evolved to become diverse in terms of culture? How and in what ways have they evolved to become diverse in terms of systems and processes and pedagogy and research agendas and the manner in which we embrace the full tapestry of all of the men and the women, all of the humans that come into our spaces, whether they are diverse in terms of ability, in terms of race, gender, sexuality, ethnicity, nationality, economic background, in any of the myriad of ways that define diversity in the world we live in today. I found that what becomes so important for us as we think about diversity is to approach the conversation of diversity with a framework of innovation. Hayden and Christensen, who right down the road at Harvard University, oftentimes talk about this idea of innovation and innovation and innovation. And there was a wonderful book that was authored titled The Innovator's DNA, which I've taken greatly from and tried to reframe in some different ways. And they did this magnificent research on innovative leaders across sectors. So innovators in the K through 12 world, innovators in higher education, innovators in the not-for-profit government arena, innovators in the community-based social sector environment, innovators. And they asked questions, what were the key themes, key genetic aspects of being an innovative leader? And the first thing that they talked about was this idea that innovators are always questioning the world. They're asking why, what, how, if. They're questioning. The second characteristics of innovators is that innovators are always seeking solutions across boundaries. They're not limiting themselves to simply the Jesuit institutions, although they are wonderful and magnificent. But they are looking for solutions no matter where they can find them, whether they're in another type of institution or in a totally different sector or environment. Innovators are also constantly looking for spaces to engage with other innovators. One of the reasons why I am a huge champion of these types of summits is because it gives us a chance to create what I refer to as an innovation hotspot, because we're bringing folks together in a learning community, having an opportunity to engage in questions, to seek a higher level of understanding and truth, revisable truth, that can only come through dialogue, that can only come through sharing. The fourth is that innovators have what I refer to as a bias towards action. So they're trying to experiment with stuff. They're not allowing themselves to be frozen in paralysis of analysis, of paralysis, of conversation and pontification and theorization, and they're trying to get something done. And once innovators can figure out some things that are working, then innovators are constantly trying to take ideas to scale. So they figure out what's working. And once they figure out what's working, they want to go bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger and more pervasive, and they want to go deeper and deeper and deeper. And the last thing, and this is a part of the framework that I actually added to it, because the first 5 came classically from the book, The Innovator's DNA, with a little bit of helpful massaging to make them a little more consumer friendly by myself. The last piece to this, though, I found to be fundamental to diversity work in particular. And that characteristic is that innovators are not only questioning, they're not only looking for solutions, they're not only engaging others, they're not only experimenting and taking new ideas to scale, but innovators are also leading with courage if they're leading in the diversity space, because they're cutting against the grain. And they oftentimes are putting themselves out there. And they're raising a hand and saying, I think something differently. They're raising a hand and saying, I'm not quite sure. They're raising a hand and saying, I think we should consider this from this angle. They're raising a hand to say, that's not right. And so there's an aspect of courage that I've always found with diversity change efforts and individuals and leaders who are truly making a difference in that way. And so for me in my career has been founded in these burning questions that I've used to confront my own bias, to use to change community, these burning questions. And so the first burning question that has defined my career is, so what is diversity and why is it so important in what I refer to as the new economy? What is it? If I were to poll the 150 or 200 or so folks that were in the room today, I'd get 150 or 200 or so different definitions of diversity. And so what is diversity and why is it so important in the world that we live in today? The second is, how do we engage in a broad agenda of diversity and inclusion, continuing to open the conversation up to so many different groups and to so many different issues and so many different agendas, but yet at the same time, not lose sight of the differences of a gendered discussion of diversity, of a racialized discussion of diversity, of an economic or a disability and access conversation. How do we actually hold all of that complexity in our mind's eye and at the same time privilege that conversation and not water it down? How do we do that? That's something that I've spent a lot of time up at night and thinking about. This third one here, what does it mean to lead strategically around diversity? You know, one of the things that Vice Provost Taylor at University of Connecticut shared with me when I first got to campus as a precocious, newly minted doctoral student, what was 2010 ago. I'm lucky, I still got my hair, but it's a little more gray now. I never forget, he said to me, he had just given a big presentation to the Board of Trustees at the university and had signed in that university's first diversity plan and framework that they had had in kind of the modern era. And he said, the most powerful thing that I did when I presented to the chair and to the board, he said, I put up our faculty diversity numbers in 1972. And in this instance, he was talking about diversity in a classically racialized, historically underrepresented minority perspective and lens. He said, I put those faculty diversity numbers up in 72 when I joined the university. And then I put them up in 82, and I put them up in 92, and I put them up in 2002. And he said there was no difference in the number. He said the room was as silent as this one, because it was powerful. And so it begged the question how we could put people on the moon. It begged the question how we could crack the human genome. It begged the question how we can do all these fantastic and amazing things, but yet we don't seem to be able to strategically advance certain aspects of our diversity and inclusion agenda despite all of the conversation. And so that starts to bring me to my last question. Why is there so much talk of change and so little results? Why is there so much talk of change and so little results? And so these are the burning questions that have defined my career. These are the burning questions that have defined my research. These are the burning questions that have defined my platform to communicate and share and to be a friend to the nation around these issues. And like any good scholar or any good scholar administrator, I wrote some books. I wrote some books. And you know, these two books here, Strategic Diversity Leadership and The Chief Diversity Officer, were published in 2013. And they were the 10-year completion mark of a set of thinking that had began as I was concluding my doctoral studies at Michigan. And so for 10 years, I struggled. And I didn't sit down and intend to write 1,000 pages that came out on the same day. But somehow it turned into that. I'll never forget, I had turned in my manuscript, then titled The Chief Diversity Officer, to my publisher. And he has a wonderful British accent. He said, Damon, this is fabulous work. I just fear we'll never sell it. There's too many pages. And so I had a couple different options, because he said, this book is checking in at about 700 pages. He said a couple things. He said, number one, you can go in and you can cut very powerfully, and we can get this down to something manageable. He said, number two, we can just bust it down the middle and call it volume 1 and volume 2. He said, or you might want to go back and rethink the project a little bit and figure out how you could turn this massive book into 2 complementary books that could live separately and distinctively in the academic and in the administrative space. And so I went back and I wrote for another 2 years, and ultimately ended up producing both of these books. And wanted to produce something that had a little bit of a more powerful currency. And so across both books, I think I got 27 academic reviews from all the major higher ed policy organizations across the country. So the American Council of Education, AACNU, AERA, you know, colleagues at Harvard, colleagues at UCLA, colleagues across the country to do various different reviews, because I wanted something that at least the leaders across the country would have another contribution that validated what they knew to be true. Because everything in my book is very simple. They're very simple insights that emerged from about We surveyed the nation and collected about 900 surveys and from institutions across the country. We did about 400 or 500 hours of interviews, site visits across the country, thousands of documents, but all the insights were very simple. And what I found is that wherever I traveled, there were all these leaders that knew that what they were seeing was not real change. They knew that something more powerful existed that could be more strategic in orientation. They knew that if there was no financial investment, things were not going to be different. They knew if the senior leadership didn't elevate conversations to their executive level, things were not going to be different. They knew that if tenured full members of the faculty always thought that that was just something over there, things would not be different. They knew that if spaces like this didn't exist for conversations to happen and evolve that brought together multiple different lenses across a diversity discussion, that we would never get to a place that would be talking more inclusively about what was possible. They knew all these different things. And so I wanted to write them, and I wanted to have something with some big names on it, and so I did. So I hope that you like them. And so the conversation for me began with this idea, so what is diversity in the 21st century? What is this frame? What is this narrative? And one of the things I like to talk about is there's this perfect storm of dynamics across our sociological landscape, our sociological imagination in this country right now, if you will, that has transformed the diversity conversation from being something that is a nice to do, a matter of convenience, to something that I believe is a matter of the most high-level strategic importance in our nation. It's driven by the changing demography. We have already tipped to majority, minority in terms of race, ethnicity. It's driven by the fact that if we don't take full advantage of the leadership potential of women in all aspects and at all levels of leadership, then we will not be able to have the types of leadership that we need. It's driven by the fact that more and more the LGBTQ community is burgeoning in space, in size, and in voice. It's driven by the dynamics that are happening all across this world in terms of globalization and emergence of a global economy. The fact that in communities like I come from in Dayton, Ohio, work has left in the Rust Belt. The fact that as we look forward into the current electoral season, that electoral season will be all about one word and one word alone. Anybody want to take a shot at what it's about? What's this electoral season going to be all about? One word? Close. Anybody want to take one more stab at it? Immigration. Other words? It's going to be about diversity. It's going to be about haves and have-nots. It's going to be about urban and rural. It's going to be about African Americans and Latinos. It's going to be about immigration dynamics. It's going to be about men and women. It's going to be about power and privilege. It's going to be about diversity. And the calculus of who gets elected is all founded by who can put together the biggest tent of diversity. And that is the forever reality that we see right now in terms of our nation, in terms of our electoral politics. No one's talking about it like that, but that's exactly what it is. Can you lace together enough black and brown? Can you lace together enough educated? Can you lace together enough folks who are fundamentalists in terms of their religious beliefs? Can you lace together the big tent? Individuals who are working class, blue collar, how do you put together the diversity narrative? And so the conversation is elevated, I think, in many ways where it's not something that sits off to the side. It's something that is more and more becoming a part of the landscape of the Fortune 500, more and more becoming part of the landscape of the higher education community, and where I live, more and more becoming a part of the landscape of the social sector community. People ask me all the time, Damon, you just wrote your books, you were doing this at Wisconsin, you're at a great university, you had this amazing division of infrastructure. Why would you step away to go work at Boys and Girls Clubs of America? I stepped away because candidly I felt as if I was too late in the conversation to truly be the disruptor that I wanted to be about in terms of expanding opportunity. We serve 4 million children across the United States at the Boys and Girls Clubs of America. Over 65% of them are on free or reduced lunch. Nearly 70% of them are historically underrepresented minorities. And so when I peer into our clubs, I peer into what has the potential to be the next generation of this nation. And so in looking into that conversation and thinking about it and thinking about this new frame, for me, there was no other place that was better to be a disruptor around summer learning loss. There was no better place to give first STEM experiences than in our clubs. There was no better place to meet the crisis that we see in terms of boys of color than in our clubs. And so the decision for me was very easy. I won't be there forever. but the now of it is so powerful and it's so right, and I feel so rooted in that mission. And it all fits into this overarching conversation of what is diversity in the 21st century. One of the things I found when I'd work on my campus at Wisconsin is I'd get up to give remarks, and anyone in the room, any Badgers in the room? Any Badger alum in the room? One Badger? One Badger? Hey Badger, how are you doing? You know, wonderful university with deeply progressive roots in many ways at the university, although at the state level, it's some different things going on, but the university is deeply progressive. And I found that if I get up and give remarks and I start talking about diversity, and in my remarks, if I didn't say race, ethnicity, gender, sexuality, nationality, economic background, differences of position and differences of accessibility, and I didn't put all these different definitions together in each and every single remarks, I would get a penalty flag thrown on me. It was like yellow penalty flag on the vice provost for not using all the words of inclusion. Have any of you ever felt like you get a penalty flag for not using the right words sometime? I'm in a room with a bunch of advanced learners. You never got that penalty flag? I got that penalty flag all the time. So you get these penalty flags that get thrown on you for not using the right words. And one of the things that I believe, and it's one of the first principles I share, is that we can't get to a higher level of understanding and inclusion if we can't communicate with one another. And so no matter where you sit, no matter what your identity characteristics, I think we have an incredible responsibility to create safe spaces for dialogues to happen, for folks to share, whether they're white males, full professors, senior administrators, whether they are members of our custodial team, whether they're wonderful members of our culinary teams. No matter where they sit in our institutions, people have to be able to access the conversation. And so how do we create safe spaces for that? One of the things I oftentimes found is that safe spaces oftentimes don't happen because individuals are in pain, because they've been feeling the burden of sexism, racism, homophobia, whatever the case may be, positionism, and they don't feel a sense of safety. They feel a sense of pain. And so when they do find voice, at times it can be lashing out, but how do we create that safe space and that dialogue? One of the things I found to be so important is moving quickly beyond the conversations of identity to how do we get to a conversation about goals? How do we get to a conversation about goals? And so one of the things that we offered in Strategic Diversity Leadership was a strategic goals framework that for me started to capture an ability for us to talk about diversity from an organizational perspective in ways that was fully embracing of the narrative of the now. At the top of the pyramid is what we've classically talked about in terms of access and equity. Getting folks into our institutions and getting them out. Men and women, individuals who are diverse across many different means, but it's the classic way of counting and head count and demography and promotion and tenure and time to tenure and the number at different levels of leadership, but in terms of access and equity. At the bottom right, domestic and international diversity research and scholarship. I think it's one of the ways that we don't oftentimes talk about the diversity framework of our institution, but it's the scholarship that's happening in a gendered way, the scholarship that's happening around economics, the scholarship that's happening around domestic topics, but it's also thinking about that scholarship, which I believe is a critical part of the discussion. And then there's this other piece that's preparing students for a diverse and global world. And then at the center of the pyramid is what I refer to as this idea of a multicultural and inclusive campus environment. This is some imagery taken from the campus that I was most recently at, the University of Wisconsin-Madison. And it shows imagery, and my apologies if it's a little bit dark. There's an individual on the right who is dressed in traditional native gear, who's got his quote-unquote ghetto blaster on his shoulder. And then the image to the left is even more damning in many ways, and it's actually the image of a lifelike sized Spider-Man doll. Now we all know the classic Spider-Man in the blue and the red. This is a lifelike Spider-Man doll, actually the black Spider-Man suit. You know, he came out with the sexy black and white Spider-Man suit some years ago. This is actually a doll that a group of students decided that they wanted to put a belt around its neck and throw it off the side of the building at their house. And they took this doll and they put the belt around, they threw it off the side of the building, and that is the doll hanging there, and they sat it on the ledge. Now, you could imagine what happened when some of our student leaders were walking down the street. So So next thing you know, this is now a campus climate issue that is registering in the Netherlands. It is a campus climate issue that is registering all across the country. And now we've got students in our alumni community talking about this in many ways. We quickly mobilized members of the campus safety team and went over and had the doll removed and wanted to talk with the students, not punitively necessarily because they were on private property, but wanted to talk to them educationally about what happened here. What was interesting is we had the conversation with them is that they had no idea that what they were symbolizing here was strange fruit and the bodies of black males hanging from trees. Their exact response to us was, quote, "We were mocking suicide," which is even worse in some ways. It doesn't make it better, it was even worse. We then began to talk to them, and these young students were not naive first-year students on campus, they were juniors heading into their senior year who had fulfilled their global diversity requirement. Really begs the question of what are the learning goals that sit at the heart of those requirements, and what are the types of experiences that we're giving individuals to look at the world from multiple different perspectives to truly prepare them for the world they live in today. And so I recall this story, and I was at the University of Chicago Booth School of Management for a wonderful event. And at that event, it was a celebration of the alum of the Booth School of Management. And I was sitting at the table of an individual who's a dear friend of mine who had won the Young Alumni Award. So we were there as his guests. We're sitting at the table, myself, his party. We're sitting at the table, and I'm sitting there, I'm talking to an individual, wonderfully dressed man. I mean, he's got on just a beautifully tailored little business suit. He's got the glasses. He looks like some corporate something, taking down the something, doing the something. And so I say to him, we're having chit chat, everybody's drinking, and what do you do? At the time I was still at Wisconsin. And I said, I work at the University of Wisconsin. And, oh, really? Okay, I went to Northwestern. Tell me about it. I went to Booth, tell me about it. I said, now when you get this question, you do diversity work, and you're talking to somebody look like, sometimes you don't quite know how to respond. So I said, I work in diversity and inclusion. I'm the chief diversity officer at the university. And then he said my favorite thing in the world to say. He leans in and he says, "Interesting. Could you say more?" I love that thing. It's my favorite question. Yeah. Anytime somebody stumps you don't really know, or they're talking a bunch of mess in a meeting, just say, "Could you say more? Could you go deeper into that?" So I leaned in and I said, "Could you say more?" And his response to me was wonderful. He said, "Well, I'm a managing partner for one of the top 5 management consulting firms in the country, and I lead mergers and acquisitions." And he said, one of the reasons why I find what you're doing so compelling is I had no idea that there were individuals in the higher education community endeavoring to do the types of things that you're talking about. He said, because your graduates are my students once they come into my firm. And he said, it's powerful. He said, because the degree to which you are preparing students to lead in this global context is so critical. He said, because we get them into our firm and we have all kinds of problems with them. He said, part of the problem, he said, is that they don't know how to work with individuals who are different than themselves. And he started talking and making comparative statements between the domestic-born new hires in particular and the international-born new hires. He said the internationals are much more savvy with working across difference. And then he said something that was very much millennial in nature. And I saw a wonderful report by the Center for Workforce or Work and Family, yes, the Center for Work and Family. And I'm writing a new white paper on Centennial Generation Youth right now. But I saw your wonderful white paper on millennials in the workforce, and I can't wait to get my hands on it. But he said something very interesting. He said, this generation that's coming out, he said, the domestic-born students, they're very different fundamentally from the internationals. He said they have no resilience. He said they don't know how to suffer, and they want everything now and immediately. He said they don't know how to put the time and the effort in that it takes to truly work their way through the system. And he said that, and they don't have the experiences with diversity that they need to have. And I was sitting there, I was like, man, chapter and verse, I'm writing his name. Now, can I interview you? Can I quote you on that? And we had a wonderful conversation. And what it really began to crystallize for me is even more this idea of what is 21st century leadership and how are we preparing all of our students, but not just our students, how are we preparing ourselves to lead in the world that we find ourselves, in the campuses, in the communities that we find ourselves. This idea of ideation and problem solving, so key, particularly with the ways that information and data have become so ubiquitous and everywhere, how data and information is tripling and doubling and quadrupling. I have never found a world in which people want me to put things in a metric more than I find it now. And how we quantify and qualify, how we cut through and peer through all the complexity and get to the deep and penetrating truths in a mass of data. That's about ideation and problem solving. How we create a world in which our young people, our students, ourselves are digitally literate. One of the things that becomes so important, and I remember I was sitting on this task force at Wisconsin, we were talking about it, and we were talking about the fact that our students were coming in and they were evaluating the merits of the National Institute of Health website and TMZ as having equal levels of accuracy and authenticity in the data that was being presented. Not just being able to consume information, but the degree to which we're able to penetrate into that information and discern its goodness. That this centennial generation that we find ourselves spends 8 to 9 hours, teenagers, potentially online. That the new digital divide is not, are we accessing the digital world to access information? Even if you are poor, even if you are brown, even if you are in difficult economic circumstances, you are finding your ways to accessing the digital world. But you're doing it through handhelds, and you're doing it purely for more the purpose of entertainment and communication and voyeurism, and in some instances bullying, versus young people who are in the best schools are using technology for the sake of learning, leadership, collaboration, building 21st century skills. And we see that playing out over and over and over again. I refer to it as this new digital divide. We've got a new piece that we're trying to put together around this right now, talking about the new digital divide that's supported by Comcast. Communication abilities, as we all know, the ability to lead and follow in teams. And in this last piece that I find to be so fundamental, this idea of cultural competence. And in what ways are we becoming more and more culturally competent? And I refer to cultural competence as simply having the ability to interact and be in diverse spaces. I don't get into a whole bunch of different highfalutin definitions of it, but do you have the ability to be in those spaces and continue to stay in learning mode and in understanding mode and relationship building mode such that you can thrive in those worlds? Whether those worlds are diverse by race, those worlds are diverse by ability, those worlds are diverse by economics, in what ways are you checking at the door and trying to understand the privilege that each of us brings into the world and into the conversation? How do we get there? I think so much about learning systems and the types of learning systems that we bring to bear. And one of the aspects of the Jesuit tradition that I am wholly in supportive of is this idea of the whole person, and the ways in which we take the educational experience and the pedagogy of the classroom and how we try to create and make pathways where it's meaningful in other aspects of our lives. This is a model that I created that we actually recently partnered with Disney, Toyota, and the University of Phoenix against building out into a set of leadership programs that will inform the next 21st century leadership agenda of our clubs across the country. And it begins with this notion that we have to help each and every one of our young persons to really deeply explore their passions, to start understanding and defining purpose and goals in their lives, helping them to have a full growth mindset and an understanding that they can maximize their potential. And then how do we help them really think about pathways to success and pathways to learning? You talk to underserved communities, and too often you'll ask them what success is, and they may say go to college. But we know that the majority of our new college graduates are unemployed and underemployed. And we know that the difference maker long-term is not just going to college, but it's the types of fundamental experiences that you put with the collegiate experience. We notice those high-impact learning experiences in and out of the classroom. It's the integrated meaning-making that we bring together that ties and woves it all together in such a way that we can see greater possibilities in our lives. But I believe it begins with passion. You show me a leader, you show me an individual who achieved breakthrough results in their life, whether you're talking Hillary Clinton, Barack Obama, LeBron James, Michael Jordan, Bill Gates, Oprah Winfrey, I'm going to probably show you someone who found passion early in their life about what they wanted to do. I'm going to probably show you someone who established some sense of goals and a trajectory of how one thing led to the other. I'm probably going to show you someone who got knocked down over and over and over again, but they were gritty and resilient, approaching it with a growth mindset, to quote Querl Dweck, and they kept overcoming the challenge over and over again. For those of you who will come to my follow-up sessions, I'm going to begin those sessions with a manifesto that I recently wrote titled More. M-O-R-E. I recently wrote my leadership manifesto at the suggestion of a new colleague who is a global vice president for Adobe and creativity. And I'm going to begin that by talking about more. And I'm going to talk more about these principles that I believe in. But this idea of passion, purpose, potential, and pathways, and then surrounding them with the right experiences, with the right credentials, with the right relationships, and with the right role models. And that it's an integrated model that takes each and every aspect of these different dimensions or different modalities of learning to truly get breakthrough results in our lives. To channel Jim Collins, the noted author of Good to Great, and his ideas of the flywheel. I liken this model to a flywheel. And I've been building this flywheel since I was a very young student graduating from my boarding school. I grew up in the inner city of Dayton, Ohio. In about a 700 square foot house that cost about $30,000. But I was the wonderful recipient of incredible privilege because my parents, my father who raised me, who did not birth me, had such a deep and penetrating view of what was possible for me and made investments to help to accomplish that and started culcating this model. And I've now kind of put it together, and we actually are going to be rolling this out in the Boys and Girls Clubs of America movement. I'm incredibly excited about rolling it out over time. But as I bring it back to our work here institutionally, and I bring it back to the conversation of how does real change happen in our environments, what does that look like? How do we get there? There's this metaphor that I've oftentimes come back to, and I wrote about it in the chapter of the book that talks about change. I talk about the cheetah and the wolf. Any National Geography buffs or watch the National Geographic channel? You got a couple in the room. Go ahead and raise your hand. Don't be embarrassed. Raise those hands up. Don't be embarrassed. It's all good. I'll never forget, I was sitting there watching. I was watching the cheetah. And I saw this cheetah, and the cheetah was high on the plain of the Serengeti, peering out, looking across the landscape. And when the cheetah would see their prey, the antelope, the rabbit, the elk, whatever it was, goes tearing after it in an incredible burst of energy. And either takes it down or doesn't very quickly. And once they're finished, and because that's the entirety of the strategy, they then come back and they go, and they wait to reload. The wolf, by comparison, doesn't hunt singularly, moves collective and moves in pack. Not found in just one terrain, but found across nearly every terrain we have on our planet, whether very arid, very rural, very densely jungle, does not matter, Arctic. Each and every aspect of the pack plays a role in terms of defining the collective health and the ultimate goals of where we're going to go. And what I found is that this was a powerful metaphor for oftentimes how diversity work happened on our campus. It was incredibly cheetah-like. And one of the things that we're actually poised to do for the back to school season across the country is we're actually doing a little video where I'm going to talk about this model, and we're providing the chapter that talks about it. Because across the country, there's all these cheetah moments that are happening on our campuses. And those cheetah moments are creating a certain type of response institutionally that we actually tracked for about a decade across all these different institutions. And so we want to help to bring some greater clarity of what's going on and how institutions can move forward. But we talked about cheetah moments as being crisis-driven, isolated efforts. Diversity is 100 different things that we do, a lack of coordination, no point leadership, more symbol than actual real and material. the efforts that are simple and mechanistic. They're really small in focus, frenetic, versus things that are strategic and data-driven with a scorecard, connecting and synchronous, collaborative efforts, really trying to build it across our institutions vertically and also laterally, but really moving forward in a much more integrated and collaborative way. This is a model that we actually created called the Diversity Planning Crisis Model that actually is published in Strategic Diversity Leadership. And what we oftentimes see is that there's a diversity crisis that happens. Actually, I case studied the Larry Summers diversity crisis effort that happened a couple years back when he was president at Harvard University. I know some colleagues in the room were perhaps there at that time. But we actually started kind of tracking various different crisis moments. And you see these crisis moments happen, and they can be triggered by anything. They can be triggered by by a letter that's put on a student's door, like recently happened down at University of Wisconsin-Madison. I don't know if any of you heard that. It made national news. Crisis moments can be triggered by things that happened, gaffes on behalf of senior leadership, as was the case particularly with President Summers when he made the comment regarding women in the faculty. But crisis moments can be triggered by all types of different things. And oftentimes when those crisis moments triggers, what we see is an internal and external stakeholder response, which is actually driven and made even more frenetic by social media, which can gas it. Leading to different types of protests and demands. There's a wonderful website that lists all the various student demands that are happening across the country right now. And it's my understanding Boston College has a little bit of experience with that not too terribly long ago. I'm waiting for the carolers to show up. But you see these various different things that happen, and I believe we have to be very vigilant of it, and I believe we can't capitulate to these demands that we see over and over again, but at the same instance too, how do we have a real and serious and meaningful conversation about the issues that are being elevated? Oftentimes these demands are then led to by a declaration of support by senior leadership. And it's almost like every president in the country has the same response playbook. One of the things I have on my bucket list is to be invited to go to Harvard and to be a part of the summer faculty for the new president, to really help them get a good grasp on what this work means. But I haven't yet got the invitation yet. So if anybody can make a phone call for me, tell a brother I got something I want to share with them. But it's almost like presidents may not know anything about diversity at all. I mean, they may know nothing. But darn it, when that crisis moment happens and their campus starts percolating, they know what to say. We believe deeply and fundamentally in the belief of diversity. Diversity is part and fabric to who we are institutionally. It's a part of our culture and our tradition. It's a part of our mission. It's a part of what we deeply hold to be of the highest value systems. And we are going to do something. We're going to create a planning group. We're going to commission a planning group so we can discuss and we can talk and we can communicate and we can understand. Now, I am actually a huge believer in shared governance, and I think that in some ways the collaborative planning systems of higher education are aspirational in so many different ways. But we bring these planning groups together and they deliberate and they discuss and deliberate. They pontificate and they theorize and they define and they review. They look at the literature and they look at the institutions that they benchmark and they look at their well, they oftentimes don't look at their history. There was a wonderful institution I went to, and they did something so novel. They actually started their new diversity planning effort with the last 5 plans. And they actually just pulled all those old plans out, and they took all the recommendations, and they reorganized the recommendations into the new framework, and they had it in like a week. What a concept. But oftentimes we see these different things that happen, and the plans generally have the same types of dynamics to it. They talk about the demographics, they talk about the climate, they talk about creating diversity education moments. They all want a chief diversity officer who's quote unquote gonna tell somebody what to do. And I said, the chancellor, the president, the provost don't tell anybody what to do on these campuses. How the heck is the chief diversity officer gonna do it? That's not happening. But there's these narratives that exist out there about what these individuals are going to do. And first thing I tell folks is, if you think you're going to hire me and I'm going to come in and tell somebody what to do, then that's totally not the reality of what we find. But I can help to convene a conversation, and I can help to move an agenda forward, as this space is hopefully doing for you at your campus and the wonderful team that put it together. Can we give a little love for the planning group again to put this event together? And so ultimately we get acceptance of the plan, and it can move in a couple different directions. Too often it moves into delays in implementation and superficial stuff that happens moving forward. And so I return back to my first principle around engaging this work, and this is no magic bullets. It's a process of deep introspection. It's a process of building real material plans. It's a process of investing in those plans. And I'm gonna give a couple further insights around how I think you can actually move forward to get things done. How many of you in the room have ever heard the name Donna Shalala, by show of hands? Donna Shalala is a really iconic leader in higher education, really an iconic leader in our nation, to be candid. She was former chancellor at the University of Wisconsin at Madison. She was a former Clinton appointee, president at Miami University. I went to Miami University, president of the University of Miami, but a really, really iconic leader. And I had the dear, real pleasure and treat to have some conversations with her, not a lot, but to hear her lecture and to have a chance to hear some things from her. And I was a scholar in residence for the American Council of Education for their ACE Fellows program. So I worked with ACE Fellows program for about 5 years, and I was doing my thing with the fellows, and we were actually being hosted on her campus. And so she came over to speak with us, and she started talking about change. And you know when you're in a room with somebody and they really know what they're talking about, and you're like, oh my gosh, and you start geeking out on it. There's this wonderful new piece that we're working on teens, and we talk about this idea of homago. Teens want a space to hang out, mess around, and geek out. Hang out, mess around, and geek out. Geeking out means going deep into something topically. It could be spoken word, it could be science, it could be STEM, it could be athletics. They want to geek out. And so I geek out around leadership. And so when I was in the presence of President Shalala, I was truly geeking out on all that this little 4-foot woman was bringing to the table. And so she got up there and she started talking about when she became the new incoming president of the University of Miami. You know, wonderful location, beautiful institution, strong institution. But she arrived on campus and she felt as if something was missing in terms of the academic culture of the space. And she felt like the students were a bit too transient. There was too much of a commuter energy and culture to the space. And so she talked about the coming and the going of the students, the coming and the going of the students. And she said, what I decided to do was to put the lawn chairs on the lawn. Could you say more? So she put the lawn chairs on the lawn, and the lawn chairs, for me, became this powerful metaphor for how change begins through small actions. And what she said was, if I would have came in and immediately said, no cars for first-year students. If I would have came in and immediately said, all first-year students must live in the residence hall. If I would have came in and immediately said those things, all I would have done is got shot at in so many different ways. She said what was important was to understand how when I looked across that campus environment, there were no spaces for community in the geospatial cultural dynamics of the institution. There was no spaces for students to sit and have a wonderful, refreshing frozen drink, because it's hot as Hades down there, right? There was no spaces for them to sit and get a wonderful, expensive cup of Starbucks that had been brewed right there. And there was no spaces for community. So the first thing she did was she went out and made huge investments in lawn chairs and in furniture to start shifting the geospatial dynamics of the environment. And so what she said, and what was so profound to me when I returned that to this conversation, is what are the lawn chairs that live in your space that you could put out? What are the easy, low-hanging fruit tactics that you could do today that cost no money? I could put something new into my syllabus. I could go and reach out and extend myself to mentor someone who does not look like me. What are the things that you could do immediately if we all 150 of us in here right now put down one thing that helped us to advance this agenda? We'd have 150 tactical ideas that could immediately get done. That was a powerful idea for me, and so it stuck with me, and so I've shared it. Taking me into principle 3, and this is a wonderful model of organizational culture by the MIT professor Edgar Schein. I always mess his name up, but I totally give kudos to his work. But he talks about this idea of our organizations being comprised of cultures, right? And he uses this beautiful model that we've adapted, and he talks about cultures as having these rings of overlap. And at the outer most ring of culture is what's referred to as the geospatial. And I was just referring to that in the last recommendation as I was talking about Donna Shalala. So the geospatial, powerful culture in this room right now. I mean, I walked into the room and I was like, wow, this is beautiful. And it's a powerful culture. And our histories are our histories. No matter what those individuals that are communicated on the wall in terms of demography, I would never be profane in such a way to say that these pictures should not be here, because that is the beautiful history of this institution. It's a part of what makes it so special and so powerful and so magical. But the question when we think about changing and moving culture forward is, how do we evolve and create new cultures that exist on our campus that continue to add to and enrich and to continue to embrace a more full and robust expression? Because every one of our campuses has a brand, right? And so we think about brands, and I was having a wonderful conversation about brands with a new colleague who I'll be working with on some of his research, dealing with how diversity is depicted in our web environment. But we talk about brands, and we think about these powerful brands that we have in our world, right? So, Nike, just do it, right? You see the swoosh, that's the icon. But when you see the swoosh, you think, athletic excellence. You think about the iconic individuals associated with the brand. You think about performance at the highest level. You think about great gear. You think about stuff. You think about Apple. You think about great user experiences, beautiful technology. You think about those things when you think about the brand. When you think about the brand of Boston College, what comes up? Great institution, wonderful scholars, powerful tradition, tier 1, amazing Jesuit tradition, coming out of a Catholic educational paradigm. All those things are part of the brand. When you overlay diversity over top of that, what do you think? That's your diversity brand. Good, bad, or indifferent. When you lay gender over top of it, what do you think? When you lay race over top of it, what do you think? And what is to be respected. What could be is to be built. And so the question around some of these things, we think about approaching it from a culture change perspective, is how do we continue to add new symbols, new traditions, create new myths that bring new culture into existence in an environment. This is a space of culture building that's creating new culture of inclusion. And so it's a new tradition. And so how do these things continue to be built, continue to evolve over time, to continue to create the dynamic that we are moving our institutions forward in an inclusive way? This fourth principle I find to be so important. Deborah Meyerson, who is a wonderful organizational feminist scholar at Stanford University, talks about this idea of temperate radical. Temperate radical. She wrote this beautiful book called The Temperate Radicals. And the book talked about the ways in which ordinary citizens in their environments, in their institutions, in their businesses, in their companies, were creating real and material change by becoming what she referred to as temperate radicals. Tempered because they were working within the context of their institution and their systems. They weren't trying to break them. Radical because they were trying to change those systems from the inside out. Beautiful language, temperate radical. And she talked about this idea that change begins with self-exploration, looking to evolve our everyday practice. And so it comes back to those ideas that I was talking about in terms of the lawn chairs. She talked about looking for everyday ways to spark new ways of behaving. I talked about the innovator's DNA, pilots, small initiatives, let's go, trying to find out what works. She talked about this idea of each and every one of us has some type of idiosyncrasy credit, some type of a capital that we bring. If you're a full professor, you have a lot of capital. If you're male, you have lots of capital. If you are an individual who is heteronormative, you have capital. If you are a senior administrator, you have capital. How do we use that capital in the service of others? Very powerful language as she talked about interrupting the usual, looking for temperate radicals. Another piece that I think becomes important, we oftentimes get lost, particularly when we're creating diversity plans, because it comes like 100 different things. One of the wonderful aspects of my job is I have a chance to be mentored by and to talk with often some of the most successful leaders in the country, particularly in the Fortune 500 world. So I oftentimes interact with our board of governors, which has on it the former president of Microsoft, Cisco, Taco Bell, Coca-Cola, you name them, they're on our board. So I have this wonderful opportunity to interact with these individuals all the time. And I'll never forget, I was rolling out our new teen strategy. And I had given this presentation in front of our Southeast trustees, which is not the governors, but the Southeast trustees. But the chairman of the board was in that room. And he heard it, and everybody thought, oh, this is great, this is great. He came up to me, and he was like, He wasn't feeling me. You know, he didn't say more. He didn't say, Damon, say more. He was like, Damon, go back and think about it some more. So I went back and thought about it some more. And I came back to him, and he saw me present it to the Northeast trustees in New York City. And he said, better. He said, you did this. He did this little hand motion with his hands. He then saw me give it at the Board of Governors meeting, which was his meeting, and he said, now that's a plan. And he talked about tightening things down. We have a great difficulty in our planning efforts in higher ed, particularly around diversity. We don't tighten it down. It's not 100 things. What are the key critical leverage points that are going to be the 5 things that really move this thing, whatever the case may be? What are those things, and how do you get laser focused on that? The other piece of this is I've never seen a diversity plan or effort move that didn't have AIR. Accountability, infrastructure, incentives, and resources. AIR. Things can't breathe without AIR. So what's the accountability framework? How are we building an infrastructure laterally and vertically to get it done, whether it's committees, it's point leaders, it's an individual with designated responsibilities to point on something, creating incentives to create pull energy for folks to get involved. One of the things I think is so important is how do we have competitive resources that exist centrally, maybe in a diversity office, a provost office, or wherever, a human resource office, depending how the work is defined, that the campus community can tap into to seed new initiatives. That's how you get folks involved. And it doesn't take a ton of money to do it oftentimes, but it takes something meaningful. And then actually making the investments of resources. I wrote this report for the last 2 years with the magazine Insight into Diversity based upon, they give this award annually to about 100 institutions across the country who are really grappling very aggressively with issues of diversity and inclusion. So they give this award, this kind of blue panel award, and it's they give it based upon responses to a survey instrument. And so in getting the responses to that survey instrument, I would actually go through and write this report up. And here's a couple of the insights that we learned. One of the things is we compared HEED institutions to a national comparison group. Amongst the HEED institutions, 85% had an annual diversity plan. 89% were reporting diversity at the board level. About 70% had a scorecard. 67% said it was in some way a part of the annual review of administrators. And about 50% said it was a part of their faculty activity report. It was a part of the reporting activity. So they were building AIR into their systems. And you can look at the comparisons. Annual diversity report, 39%. Board, 46%. Diversity scorecard, 17%. 21%, and then 10%. So huge demarcation of difference that you could see in some of the best practices that we saw and in some of the national comparison groups. I think diversity point leadership is important, and I've talked about that these officers are trying to be point and trying to engage a community and integrate efforts. They are not here to tell anybody what to do. This idea of scorecarding, I think, becomes so important. And I'm moving very quickly through this because we're getting low on time, but this idea of scorecarding becomes so very important. What we measure is what we pay attention to. You've done some wonderful investments into an organizational culture and climate study, which I think gives you some wonderful first mover benchmarking data that could live in the multicultural inclusive campus climate dimension. And so the question is, as you have that data, in what ways would you use that data to help you have metrics that you're trying to move forward with to improve the campus experience for faculty and staff, and also having parallel information for students? And in what ways might you build out other dimensions of a scorecard? But I believe scorecarding is so very essential to actually having a strategic effort moving forward. This idea of our senior leadership being involved. And I'm very thankful that some members of senior leadership were able to be here today. As I began and have talked about throughout, the success of our efforts is not all defined by our senior leadership. But if our deans aren't involved, if our vice presidents and provosts aren't involved, if our president and our chancellors and individuals who lead at the highest levels are not involved, then chances are the effort is more symbolic than material. And that's just a fundamental reality of anything that we're trying to get done, particularly around something like this. And so I always talk about that, and I talk about those leaders having a bias towards action, not just towards words. Each and every one of those individuals, I think we should hold them accountable to having a personal commitment to this work. And we embed that personal commitment into the processes of selection of those leaders. In the world that we live in today, it is fundamental that it needs to be a part of their DNA, period. And it only happens if campus communities say, hey, we want to make that a part of the selection process of who we hire to lead. These individuals have so much power to keep a focus on a change effort, to regularly participate, to infuse these ideas into their speeches and in their words. You know, people say all the time, you know, it's just words. And I oftentimes talk about symbolic figureheads and symbols without material foundations. But symbols are so important, particularly in our campus communities, because they establish the culture and they establish the overall narratives of what matters. And so I would never discount symbol. All I ask is that symbol oftentimes be met with material commitments as well. And then I move to my final slide that I'd like to share here today. And it's something that was, some guidance that was given to me years ago by the now departed Vice Provost Emeritus Frank Hale Jr. of The Ohio State University. And he said, you can be supportive of something, you can like something, you can think it's a good thing to do. He said, but commitment only exists in the presence of currency. And he said, commitment without currency is counterfeit, and don't let anybody tell you different. I will end with that. Thank you so much. You've been a very attentive audience.